For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Lumkile Nkomfe. Joining me are authors Adrian, Saville and Bruce Whitfield, here to discuss their book titled It's About Time, Banking Beyond Borders. Adrian, Tyme Bank's story begins as both a local innovation and a global partnership. Could you walk us through the original idea behind Tyme? How did the founders' experiences and South Africa's banking environment shape its early DNA?
I think that's one of the foundations of the book, is that the creation behind the ambition was in a very unobvious place, in a large commercial bank. And there's the ambiguity in that it afforded it the opportunity to be imagined, thought of, but became a headwind in its creation. So that was one of the big origin stories, is imagine what we could do if and then, and here are the parts that we need. And those moving parts very quickly became complications. And that leads to one of the first ejections of Tyme from being an imagined community bank inside of a large commercial bank. Go and find another place to build.
What was so amazing, though, about the origin story of Tyme is that over a period of 15 years, it's owned by 5 large different corporates. 4 out of those 5 don't know what to do with this thing. Sim Chabalala, the CEO of Standard Bank, says you can't have a cult inside of a bank like Standard Bank because they were so wild. They were wild, right?
Yeah.
They were doing weird things. They were like going into shebeens and going into spaza shops in townships and putting the Standard Bank logo all over the place. And nobody in Standard Bank really knew what they were up to because they were allowed to operate on their own. And by being allowed to do that, they managed to sign up 1 million customers using really antiquated technology, Blackberries and all sorts of other things, and forms and branches. And Standard Bank just realized that they had no control over Kunyonka and this motley crew of ex-government people and people who worked in the NGO sector, people who wanted to truly make financial services accessible to everybody. And then you had people in credit card division or wherever going, but we have to pay higher costs than they do in our cost center. They don't have to pay these charges. That's not fair.
And therefore they have to play by these rules. And so it quickly
clipped its wings.
It translates into complications. And to land up, where we are now in the story of the business, I think, as Bruce says, you have to have, he calls it cult. And I think you could more sort of politely call this something like passion and commitment.
I'm quoting the Chabalala, the CEO of Standard Bank.
But unmistakable, if you don't have that cocktail, you'll easily get pushed over and put back into your box. And to sort of, stay with that analogy, with this cocktail of purpose and commitment, it's a bit like trying to herd a cat into a wheelbarrow with a hosepipe.
To the credit of corporates, had it not been for corporates, Tyme would not exist. So what the Tyme inside Standard Bank taught them was what not to do. And it also created the nucleus of a team of people who would then go from Standard Bank and go into ownership briefly by Deloitte, to MTN briefly, and then to Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And that same core team, by and large, sticks together through all of these various owners until they find a home in African Rainbow Capital, which of course is Patrice Motsepe's investment vehicle. And from there, the true growth story begins, because they're left alone to their own devices at that point. But in each case, Standard Bank taught them what not to do. Deloitte taught them that this is a very dangerous world and you've got to be very careful of who your partners are.
Highly regulated.
Lots of governance rules. Yeah. They signed up 5 million customers for MTN, and MTN went, but we're not selling airtime. But in that process, they built a little bank on the side in Namibia, which was spotted by Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who went...
And that sets the thing in motion with access to capital, global expansion.
A banking license.
Yeah.
Without Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Tyme Bank doesn't ever get a banking license. And so they get a banking license. Then Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is paranoid about doing business in South Africa, they send specialists out to teach people how to sit in chairs. Both Adrian and he would be okay. I would have been fired by Commonwealth Bank of Australia because I'm sitting in a chair badly. They sent experts out and then said, the chairs aren't good enough. You can't have 2,500 rand chairs, you need 10,000 rand chairs. So they spent all the money. And then they got into trouble in Australia themselves and then had to sell.
So they recoil with their risk appetite and time. I mean, this is a business that's been sort of jilted at the altar.
4 times.
4 times.
The 5th time, they found a suitable partner. It's an amazing story of a team that sticks together from early days. They look at death in the face more times than a cat with 9 lives. And they stick together through this. There's something very special in, you mentioned DNA, in the DNA of this business. And perhaps it's leadership, perhaps it's management, perhaps it's a dream, perhaps it's purpose, perhaps it's this fundamental belief that they are mad enough to think they can change the world.
Adrian, the book mentions the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto's ideas on economic inclusion, ideas that align with Kun Jonker's background as a human rights lawyer. How did these influences shape Tyme Bank's founding philosophy and its goal of restoring dignity through financial access?
So you can see this throughout the culture of Tyme. This is an enterprise that is about giving people access, about giving them dignity, enablement. And that's what De Soto is about, is the way people are often perceived, is that they are poor, and lots of assumptions are made, and this locks them out of the system and keeps them permanently locked out of the system. And at the core of Tyme is this ambition to give people access, dignity, inclusion. And I think one thing that really needs to be underlined is there is a temptation to imagine that the moment a person's got a bank account, they've got financial inclusion. Lots of bad things can happen through bank accounts, starting with fees, then going all the way into what a person actually does with that bank account, online gaming. So financial inclusion, a bank account is just the start. And it doesn't matter which way you look at Tyme. The philosophy of De Soto permeates Tyme's business purpose.
But that philosophy, and I think Kun was doing his MBA. He was part of the first MBA cohort at Gibbs where Adrian teaches. And he was really struggling with this idea, saying South Africa's got democratic freedom. I mean, the first elections happened in 1994. We get to the year 2000 when Kun does his first MBA at Gibbs. And they're going, okay, so we've got political freedom, but we don't have financial freedom. Mm-hmm. So how do we achieve that? And he sees a book review in the Financial Times about this De Soto book. And you cannot have a successful country unless people are part of the financial system, unless they can build assets, unless they can borrow money, unless they can borrow money for growth, not for consumption.
And there's a point adjacent to this, Bruce, which is the C.K. Pralad work. And C.K. Pralad talks about the base of the economic pyramid. And it's impossible to imagine a vibrant, healthy society with strong social fabric where the base of the pyramid is locked out or excluded. So this De Soto Pralad duo needs to be seen as the foundational philosophy of Tyme Bank.
And what's really interesting is lots of companies, when you say to them, so what's your purpose? They've invented a purpose in about year 15. Because somebody's told them.
And to retrofit it.
And they go, well, when we started out, what we thought was. But this is a genuine case of the reason this business started was to solve the problem of financial inclusion. Because without solving financial inclusion in its fullest extent, for all of these people, 24% of people in the world who can't afford a bank account, unless you can fix that, people are excluded. And how can you ever have a stable society if people can't grow and leave something for the next generation, make them slightly better off than they were? There's no hope in society. So this is a story about hope. It's a story about creating a mechanism for people to grasp so that they can build their own futures. This isn't about government grants. It's not about handouts. It's all about giving people financial freedom.
And notwithstanding the success of commercial banking over centuries, 1.3 billion people are still locked out of the financial system.
Yeah. Because they're expensive to bank. So
yeah.
Therefore, old banking systems make it expensive.
And that's a really big point here, is that if you are a particularly low income, you might even be a high income but low transaction customer, then you're not commercially viable. And so this entirely rebuilds the way in which people are brought into banking and given the facilities of banking at cost points that make it truly democratically or universal, price points that established commercial banks can't get down to. And so digital banking has entirely reimagined banking.
And what's so interesting, I mean, every bank in the world is digitized. Not every bank is digital. This new generation of banks, like Tyme, like New Bank in Brazil, like the Revoluts of the world, Starling banks of the world,
Kakao,
and countless others, all over the world.
WeBank.
These guys start out as a digital bank. There are no branches. There's no infrastructure. The cost sits in computing in the cloud, sits on Amazon Web Services, sits with Microsoft. And it's still expensive to do, but it's a fraction of the cost of trying to build a network like a 200-year-old bank would have to do and maintain that network. And so the difference between being digital and digitized. So big banks will say, but we're digital. I said, yes, but you've got a cost base behind you that makes it impossible for you to offer a bank at a price point that people can actually afford. And that's the big sea change that's happening in the world right now. And Tyme is a world leader in that. So much so that Time magazine says that this is one of the most 100 influential companies in the world.
The fact that Tyme Group, was named by Tyme, the publication business, as one of the 100 most influential businesses in the world, it's important to point out that Tyme Group didn't approach Tyme, didn't volunteer themselves for consideration. And I think that, that gives you another lens on the culture and the ethos of this business, is these are people who are getting on with building a global enterprise that has true impact.
In comparing South Africa's experience of inclusion with that of Southeast Asian markets, such as the Philippines, what similarities and differences have emerged in how Tyme Bank applies those principles across cultures? And what do they reveal about the universal versus local nature of financial inclusion?
You were in Manila 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And you hadn't been back until we went back in January this year.
Yep.
And you described Manila 20 years ago like Braamfontein was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And Manila today is like New York or the City of London.
Manila has built 6, 8, make the number up, Santons in the space of 20 years. South Africa has added a couple of paddocks to Santon. So you've got going on behind the Philippines, you've got a very, very powerful growth structure. You have an economy that is overwhelmingly cash-based with a potential customer who is digitally savvy. So there's a fantastic trifecta there. Add into that a progressive, forward-thinking regulator, and you've got a wonderful combination for establishing a digital bank. There was a part missing, and that was you still need the ability to distribute, to onboard your clients, to give them access to onboarding themselves, printing their cards, and that requires the partnership model. So one of the things that you'll hear again and again and again through the book is partnership, partnership, partnership. There's no place that Tyme suggests they've done this on their own. And in South Africa, they have the retail partnership. They needed the equivalent in Philippines.
Just for clarity, the retail partnership, so if you go into a Boxer store or a Pick and Pay store or
Fushini Group
stores,
yeah,
there are
kiosks.
These machines that look like ATMs, but they are actually verification systems. So you scan your fingerprint, scan your ID, immediately Home Affairs says, you are who you say you are, here's your address, connect to your phone, kicks out a card with your name on it within 5 minutes.
5 minutes,
and you can transact. And that has been the game changer.
Yeah.
Because we did a case study for the Harvard Business Review on this, because it is a world first. Because digital banks traditionally are, you see an ad on the social media feed and you go, oh, I quite like the look of that bank, and you open a bank on your phone. These guys, a lot of their customers in South Africa are people who go to a place they trust, like a Pick and Pay or a Boxer or a Fushini store, and somebody says to them, hey, would you like to open a bank account? Let me show you. Let me help you. And there's an ambassador there to take you through the process. It's quick and it's easy. And you have to be really innovative in South Africa, because South Africa's banking system and the existing banks are really good at what they do. And they are really compelling in their advertising, and people trust them because they've been around for a long time. In places like the Philippines, they've got far more old-fashioned banks. They've got banks that need to be disrupted, and people are far more digitally savvy. They've got a younger generation of really well-educated young people who don't necessarily need the kiosks, but the kiosks are a useful shop front that says, we are real, we are here, we are present. And people like that presence. And so there is some differences between the societies, but a lot of Southeast Asia is ripe for digital disruption, and some of the big European players are wanting to go into Southeast Asia, and Tyme is maybe one step ahead.
Yeah,
Revolut
is on their way there.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of points here, Bruce, that you sort of flagged. The first is Philippines ripe for disruption, because in one part of the book we talk about how long it takes you to get back your money if there is a failed payment. And in the Philippines, you're talking about weeks to get cash back. And, imagine a low income person, having their cash held back for weeks and weeks to get a failed payment reversed. The second is, the Gokongwe family. Lance Gokongwe is the catalyst who puts equity investment into the Tyme business and then facilitates the network through their big branch network in retail as Robertson's.
Robinson Supermarket.
Yeah. Then if we rewind to South Africa, it's interesting. I was in a conversation recently with a South African bank who says, but we are digital. You can onboard as a customer, digital, no paper involved. I say, absolutely. But, it's still form filling and you've got to tick boxes and it's an onerous process. When we talk about Tyme being paperless, it is also formless, which means you are onboarded by answering questions, responding, facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, no form filling, whether digital or paper-based. And this really is revolutionary in the types of efficiencies that it builds into the system.
They created 4 core laws. A man called Chart van der Walt, who he and Kuhn met when they were at different universities in the early 1990s, and they helped each other out back then and have done lots of business together since then, including founded Tyme together. Chart is the Rails guy. He makes sure that the systems are in place and everything works really well. And he learned at the dinner table from his father about running businesses. His father started Bobtail dog food and Nola mayonnaise, for example. So good business family. Kuhn's father was a dominee in the Ingia Kerk. And so not too many business lessons there, but good values. Good values. And they are both intellectually brilliant, but they have completely different skills. And Chart came up with the 4 principles, and I can always remember 2 of them, and you can remember the other 2. So the first one was no staff member of Tyme must ever handle a piece of paper. So it's all got to be digital. And by having core principles which work here, and then taking those principles and only going to markets where
those things
can work. So you have to have a country where there's a central digital database of identity documents. So where there's no centralized ID, you can't go there because you can't verify easily without paper who people are. And it creates an environment where you restrict where you can go because actually you want to go to where it is easiest to do business, even though it's really hard to do business in some of those places.
If we stay with this question about sort of what was learned in South Africa, or what are the attributes that South Africa's got, here's a couple of them. First, world-class in biometric. Our public service sector in biometric, world-class. The second is you've got a well-branched network, which is called the retail sector, and that gives you infrastructural strength. And then you have the South African Reserve Bank as a very progressive regulator. Absent any one of those 3, and this business model doesn't work. Now we can put in a however. However, they pick up this business model, head off to Philippines, and there's a lovely set of sort of coincidences which causes them to launch in the Philippines with an aspirational brand. And that then translates into sort of these social media evangelists, which are saying, look what I got. This beautiful teal Tyme Bank card.
And they were pale fly and bank beautifully. Or it's beautiful.
And
like, what?
And now there's a lesson back for South Africa, where South Africa, arguably, and we write about this in the book, their starting position was recognizing what people needed. But one of the things that was missing was that we all want to be seen. We're all ambitious, we want to be recognized. And when you pull out your bank card, you want your bank card to be a symbol of status.
When gold cards started being handed out like Smarties in about 2012, and so you had a gold card, you were quite important, you put your gold card out. And then suddenly everybody had a gold card because that was like almost a standard credit card when there was a big credit card boom in South Africa. Then people had to start getting creative with it. And now anything that stands out, that you can be proud of to present, to say, I'm a member of this club, if you like. And so there's going to be an entire rebranding of Tyme Bank in South Africa. They're going to call it Go Tyme, like they do in
That's the Philippines. Yeah.
And the colors are going to change. And it goes from being a utilitarian baseline, bottom of the pyramid product to actually just because people don't have much money doesn't mean they don't have ambition and aspiration and dreams. Serve the dream. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes the banking dynamic in this country as they launch that in the new year.
Bruce, Tyme Bank's founders and backers, such as the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and African Rainbow Capital, each brought distinct values and expectations. What were the key lessons in managing those relationships and balancing local empowerment with global capital?
So, I mean, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia was really interesting because they saw the great technology that Tyme had, and that's what they wanted. And when the founders sold Tyme to Commonwealth Bank of Australia, the deal was it would stay headquartered in South Africa. They'd continue to build the tech in South Africa, and it would become the testing ground because Commonwealth Bank of Australia also had digital banks that wanted to grow in Southeast Asia. They took the Tyme founder, Koen Jonker, and they made him head of digital in Southeast Asia. They took a number of other talented leaders and put them in key positions all over Southeast Asia as well, and left the core team in South Africa and then imposed a whole bunch of Australians on them. And Australians are good at many, many things. The thing they are best at is petty rules and regulation. And there was a different layer of governance that they brought.
Yeah.
And it constrained the ability of Tyme to grow in the way in which it had ambition to grow.
But keep in mind, this is one of the top 10 banks in the world.
Most valuable banks, yeah.
Very
and powerful.
This is a Leviathan. And you've got this minnow upstart with brash ideas. I think that there's good sense in regulating. The however is it's over-regulation.
Tyme would not be Tyme if they were still controlled by Commonwealth Bank of Australia. They needed to be freed. And so Commonwealth Bank of Australia basically gives notice to Koen and says, you come and get a job with us. You can go and work in Sydney. We'll make you an executive director of Commonwealth Bank of Australia. It's a huge opportunity. I mean, most normal people
would leap at that.
Would go, I'll have that, thank you.
Yeah, throw their arms right around
Suburban Sydney, big salary, big share options, I'm in. He goes, actually, I'll be part of the group that buys Tyme from you instead. And they have a big meeting in Hong Kong.
Compulsion and
And Standard Chartered, also a Hong Kong-based banking group, goes, yeah, we'd like to buy it, but we want the technology. We don't like this base of the pyramid stuff. We actually love this technology and we want to make it an aspirational digital bank. And Koen and the team go, no, we don't want you as buyers. But in the room also is Johan van Zyl, who's the CEO of African Rainbow Capital, who goes back to his team at African Rainbow Capital and says, I think we should buy this. Patrice Motsepe says, if we buy this, it's the first black-owned South African bank. Yeah, let's do that. And they put money on the table to buy Tyme. And that is an amazing story of how you choose your partners. And by choosing the right partners, even though it gets really quite complicated as COVID hits, is a very, very important thing for anybody who's in any business.
Adrian, the book hints at moments when the venture came close to collapse, particularly around the COVID-19 period and the difficulties of fundraising in a volatile market. How did the team navigate those near-brink moments, and what sustained the belief in their mission?
So I think what sustains the belief in their mission, to go backwards, is it's unmistakable and unshakable. If you woke one of the Tyme team up in the middle of the night and said, what is your purpose? I think you would get...
To serve the bottom of the pyramid, to provide financial services, financial inclusion.
So these aren't people who've sort of been fed Kool-Aid and this is what you should and this is how we think. These are people who are committed to this purpose and cause. The COVID moment is existential. This could pull the rug out from underneath the business, and they'd just launched a lending product, which they quickly have to wheel back in and say, this is not the time to do this. And around this, there's other events that speak about the tenacity of this team. The capital raising, 217 pitches to raise capital.
Could you imagine what it's like? You're the CEO of the business.
216 no's.
You are heavily invested in this business. In February, when COVID started, and your funders say, we'd love to invest in you, but we can't afford to invest right out. We're out. And it's called Series B funding. All of the investors pull out. And so Koen and Chart van der Waals and African Rainbow Capital put more of their own money in to keep it going because nobody else is going to invest. So they buy more shares in their own business. And it gets to a point in about May where they're about to run out of money again.
Yeah.
So they go, right, we need to talk to people. And Koen starts making phone calls. Hour-long video calls, because that's what we do during COVID. 217 of those. No, 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 no. He speaks to the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation. He speaks to the PIC. He says, again, I don't know what the detail of those conversations was, but he just goes,
But they resulted in
you
notes.
can have control. We just want this thing to work. We just need the funding. Goes back to Standard Bank.
Spoke to telcos, spoke to banks. Yeah.
And everybody just goes, sorry, too much risk. We can't. And African Rainbow Capital are talked into replacing Kun as CEO. You'll have to read the book to find out how that plays out.
Bruce, digital services and data-driven banking are reshaping financial ecosystems globally. What do you see as Tyme Bank's comparative advantage now, especially as established banks accelerate their own digital offerings?
It goes down to cost, and it goes down to the ability of streamlined efficiency, the refusal to handle paper, the refusal to use any old banking processes, to only go into markets where there's a disruption opportunity, where the regulators are open to it. And if you look at, and again, I don't speak for Tyme at all, but if you look at the huge financial services that happen as a result of M-Pesa and MTN, which used to own Tyme, there's this new scramble for Africa in the digital sense in terms of trying to get customers on board, because the big established banks have got their branch networks and are in the physical world there. I think there's a huge African opportunity, particularly because they announced a deal recently with Sanlam to effectively, I suppose they will call it Sanlam Bank, I don't know what they're going to call it, but to do banking in Sanlam. Sanlam has also got insurance companies in north of the equator, so there's an opportunity for distribution there. So there's a wonderful opportunity there. And in Southeast Asia, digital is happening faster than here. And so they've got a first mover advantage. They're also creating in the background in Vietnam. There's a guy called Dieter Buerta, and he works with 600 Vietnamese technologists, young graduates, people whose lives, what makes them happy is code, but they're very good at it. And they're building the building blocks of a bank that you can take across.
That you could Lego the bank together.
Explain that concept, because it's actually a really colourful and useful way of saying you've got 100 Lego blocks. And not every bank in every country needs all 100 Lego blocks. You can just build your own, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you've asked me to explain it. I think you've just explained
it. But you do it
better. But I think, just to stay with Bruce's point, perhaps in two words, the first advantage that Tyme has is no legacy. And the second is a first mover advantage, because this is an industry in which scale is critical.
Finally, in a time when many economies are turning inward, can digital financial platforms like Tyme Bank become engines of reconnection, linking markets, people, and capital across borders? And how do you see the future of African fintech shaping the global narrative in the next phase of economic realignment?
Absolutely, and most definitely. So what Tyme is facilitating and what other digital banks are facilitating is inclusion, dignity, full suite banking as the business matures. And for anyone who's reading in on this, listening in on this, watching this, imagine what your circumstance would look like if I absent your credit card. You can't travel. You've just been zeroed on your ability to travel. So, although it's tempting to think of this as, now I can move money across borders, it will be, seamless, more efficient. You can actually move yourself across a border if you've got access to full suite banking. With that, financial inclusion brings insurance. It brings investment suite. It brings the ability to protect, to shelter, to grow. So there really is a magnificent result that could translate with effective digital banking. What could this mean for various African economies? I think, the first thing is to recognize, Bruce has already given an example, Africa is not a country. You've got very, very different parts that make up the continent. And so there might be some obvious places where digital banks will thrive. And there are some places where digital banks will struggle because of regulatory challenges, infrastructural challenges, or simply absent scale.
And there's a company listing on the JSE called Optasia. Optasia is an African-built, data-driven business that helps companies give credit better. If you go and apply for credit, the bank that you might go to will go, okay, fine, so give us your bank statements, give us all the stuff that we already have, but you print them off and bring them to us so we can check. And then they'll go, right, you're good for 100,000 Rand to borrow money to buy a car, or whatever the case might be. And these guys, Optasia, and what people like Tyme are doing in the background is they're looking at different data. They're looking at what time you phone on a Saturday night. Who do you phone on a Saturday night? Do you gamble online? What media do you consume? What are your habits? And the data that you give away on your cell phone is available to these guys then to risk model in a way that established financial services companies can never do. And that is a huge advantage that they have. And it's African-grown technology that is being utilized around the world. And I think that is the huge African advantage, is because of systems that don't work effectively, we've had to leapfrog. The digital leapfrog you hear people talking about, it's actually happening.
And in the business
And that's
school
the change.
language, this is, might be what we refer to as some combination of frugal innovation and reverse engineering.
That was Adrian, Saville and Bruce Whitfield discussing their book titled It's About Time, Banking Beyond Borders. Visit the Polity website to access more author interviews, news and information updates. If you haven't already, subscribe to Polity's email services, including our new monthly Polity Bookshelf email, to stay informed about the latest news and Polity Bookshelf developments.